The lifelong love story of Dima and Diana. Dima and Diana had known each other for as long as they could remember. They grew up as neighbors, their houses standing right next to each other. Every morning, they would walk to school together, carrying their backpacks and sharing silly jokes. In high school, their friendship grew stronger. They studied in the same classes, helped each other with homework, and sometimes stayed up late preparing for exams. After school, they would often stop by the park near their neighborhood, sitting on the swings and talking about their dreams for the future. On weekends, Dima and Diana liked to visit the local cafe, where they tried new desserts and laughed about their classmates' funny stories. In the summer, they went to the river with friends, swimming and watching the sunset together. Over time, their bond slowly turned into something more than friendship. Everyone around them noticed how naturally they fit together. One autumn evening, Dima finally gathered the courage to ask Diana out on a real date. Instead of just walking home together, he invited her to a small bookstore cafe in the city center. Diana smiled and agreed, pretending not to notice how nervous he was. That evening turned out magical. They drank hot chocolate, flipped through old books, and laughed at the funny illustrations they found. On the way back, golden leaves crunched under their feet, and Dima offered her his jacket when the wind got colder. After that, they began spending even more time together. They went to the cinema on Fridays, where Diana always picked romantic comedies, while Dima secretly preferred action movies. But he never complained. On Saturdays, they biked through the quiet streets of their town or explored new places they hadn't seen before. The most special memory came in winter. During the first snowfall, Dima and Diana walked to the schoolyard where they used to play as kids. The snowflakes sparkled under the streetlights, and for the first time, Dima held Diana's hand. Not as a friend, but as someone who wanted her to stay close forever. Diana squeezed his hand back, and they both knew their story was only beginning. As months passed, their relationship grew stronger. They became inseparable at school, always sitting together during lunch, helping each other with projects, and even sharing headphones on the bus rides home. Their classmates would tease them, calling them the perfect couple, but neither of them really minded. On Valentine's Day, Dima surprised Diana with a small gift. He had drawn a sketch of the park swing where they used to sit as kids and rode underneath, where it all began. Diana's eyes lit up, and she hugged him so tightly he almost dropped the drawing. One warm spring evening, after studying for finals, Dima and Diana took a walk by the river. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Dima stopped for a moment, looked at her, and finally said the words he had been holding inside for so long. "Diana, I think I've loved you long before I even knew what love was." She blushed, silent for a second, then smiled softly. "I think I've been waiting for you to say that." They both laughed nervously, but then everything felt simple, like it was meant to be. He kissed her gently, and for them, the whole world seemed to pause in that moment. When graduation day finally arrived, Dima and Diana stood side by side in their caps and gowns, smiling for photos with their classmates. It felt surreal. After so many years of walking to school together, this chapter of their lives was coming to an end. They had applied to different universities, but both in the same city, only a short bus ride apart. That summer, they spent every free day together, walking by the river, watching movies, and dreaming about the future. University life was busier, with harder schedules, but instead of drifting apart, their bond grew stronger. They made time for late-night walks after classes, studied together in the library, and found new cafes to explore in the city. One evening, after a long week of exams, Dima surprised Diana by taking her back to their hometown. He had set up a little picnic near the riverbank where they had often sat as kids. As the stars appeared above them, he looked into her eyes and said, "Diana, no matter where life takes us, you'll always be my home." She smiled, leaned her head on his shoulder, and whispered, "And you'll always be mine." Years passed quickly. Dima became an architect, always sketching buildings in his notebook, while Diana followed her dream of becoming a teacher. They rented a small apartment in the city. It wasn't fancy, just 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen, and a balcony with a view of the rooftops. But for them, it was paradise. Travel became one of their passions, and every summer they chose a new destination. One winter evening, Dima brought Diana back to the park where everything had begun: the swings, the snow, the memories of their childhood. With trembling fingers, he pulled a small box from his pocket. "Diana," he said, his voice unsteady but full of love, "we've grown up together, we've shared every chapter of life, and I want to keep writing this story with you forever. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded, whispering, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Their wedding day felt like a dream. It was held in their hometown, surrounded by friends and family. When it came time for the first dance, they chose a song that reminded them of their long walks home from school. As they moved across the floor, everyone clapped and smiled, but for Dima and Diana, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. After the wedding, they built a new life together. Their small apartment soon turned into a cozy home. Dima built shelves, Diana filled them with books and plants. They worked hard, saved money, and eventually bought a house of their own. One evening, as they unpacked boxes in their new living room, Diana smiled and said softly, "Do you realize we've walked through every stage of life side by side? From neighbors, to classmates, to this." Dima squeezed her hand gently. "And the best part," he replied, "is that our story is still only beginning." A few years later, Dima and Diana became parents. Their daughter's arrival brought new joy and wonder into their lives. Every day was filled with laughter, first steps, first words, and bedtime stories. Later, their son was born, and the house became even more lively and full of love. They continued traveling as a family, exploring beaches, mountains, and new cities. Even with the chaos of parenthood, they always found time for each other. Evening walks, cozy dinners, or quiet nights with tea and conversation. Their childhood love had grown into a strong, enduring foundation for a happy family. As the years went on, the children grew up and left home to pursue their own lives. Dima and Diana, now older, often sat together on the terrace of their house, watching the sunset. Diana opened an old photo album. "Dima," she said softly, "we've been through everything together, and every day with you has still felt special." Dima smiled and held her hand. "Yes, Diana, we grew up together, raised a family together, and built a life full of love. And the best part, we still have many more memories ahead of us." Even after decades, Dima and Diana knew that the greatest treasure in their lives was each other. Their story, which began in childhood, had become a lifelong journey, a true love that withstood the test of time. Years passed, and Dima and Diana grew older, their hair touched by silver and their faces lined with the gentle marks of time. Their children were now grown, visiting from faraway cities, sharing stories of their own lives, and bringing grandchildren to the family home. The house was quieter than in the days of small children, but it was filled with memories, laughter, and love. Dima and Diana often spent their mornings in the garden, planting flowers or watching the birds. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, holding hands, looking at the stars, and recalling the journey that had begun so many years ago. One night, Diana turned to Dima and whispered, "Do you remember the swings, the river, the park, everything?" Dima smiled, squeezing her hand. "I remember every step, Diana, every laugh, every challenge, every adventure, and I wouldn't change a single moment. We've built a lifetime together." They sat in silence, content, knowing their story had been extraordinary, not because of riches or fame, but because of love that had endured through all seasons of life. From childhood friends to life partners, from parents to grandparents, they had shared a bond that no time could ever break. As they watched the stars twinkle above, Dima and Diana understood the simplest truth. Love, when nurtured and cherished, becomes eternal. And so their story, which had begun with walks to school and shared secrets, continued in the hearts of their children and grandchildren, a legacy of a love that lasted a lifetime. And in the quiet of the night, with hands intertwined, Dima whispered, "Forever, Diana." She smiled softly and replied, "Forever, Dima." And in that forever, their love lived on, timeless and unwavering, a story that had begun in childhood and would be remembered for generations. As the years continued to unfold, Dima and Diana's love remained the heartbeat of their family. Their children, now parents themselves, often brought the grandchildren to visit. The little ones filled the house with the same laughter and joy that had once echoed when their own children were small. The grandchildren loved hearing stories about how Dima and Diana had met as children. Diana would smile and pull out the sketch Dima had once given her on Valentine's Day, the drawing of the park swing. She would show it to the children, explaining, "This is where it all began. Love can start in the simplest of places, but when it's true, it grows with you all your life." Dima, still carrying his sketchbook everywhere, would often sit in the garden with the grandchildren gathered around. He drew pictures of them, of the flowers, of the house he and Diana had built with their dreams. His hands trembled slightly with age, but his lines were steady when he drew her face. No matter how many years had passed, she was always his favorite subject. One summer evening, their family organized a surprise celebration for their 50th wedding anniversary. Friends, neighbors, children, and grandchildren all gathered in the same park where Dima and Diana had spent so much of their youth. The swings still stood, though they creaked with age. Lanterns hung from the trees, and the sound of gentle music filled the warm night air. When Dima and Diana arrived, holding hands as they always did, they were overwhelmed. Tears filled Diana's eyes as she whispered, "Look at what we've created, Dima. Look at the life we've built."